Hi, everybody. Welcome to the SAP Press Book Club event. We have a great topic today. Actually, it's a topic that I haven't done in a while, which is technical. Everybody always says, hey, Kendall, you're always doing where's the technical? So I have a great author for you, and I actually hunted him down. First of all, the book that we're doing is called ABAP to the Future, and it is by Paul Hardy. And believe it or not, this book, here it is, nice and thick. So you guys have lots of reading to do, which I did. I actually read the book, learned some things. And so we have Paul here today. And I just want to tell you a little bit about Paul before he'll start talking. So before y'all get his accent. So today we're very cultural. So me with my Southern accent, and Paul is from Australia. So he'll have a little Australian accent going on over there. So he has Paul has, I think this is fascinating. This is Paul's fourth book on this edition of ABAP. And he's done also a couple of e-bites as well with SAP Press. And he has actually worked at the same company for 32 years. And when they installed SAP back in 1997, he jumped in as an accountant and turned into a programmer, which is great. And so we have him here today, and he is, Paul, why don't you say hey to everybody?
Hello world, as the saying goes. And if in case you're puzzled, right, why I'm not speaking with an Australian accent, I was originally from the UK. All right, I've only been in Australia for 22 years.
Ah, there you go. Too funny. Well, if everybody has forgotten about me, I'm Kendall Tyler, and I'm with DXC now. So everybody, which is exciting for me. So I'm going out and selling SAP project work. And so that is why this is intriguing with Paul, with his ABAP, because, Paul and I were talking, and he actually wrote this in his book. So who was it? It was who was the guy that you quoted? He was, oh, wait a minute, let me find him. Yes, so he talked about the hiding of the ABAPer. So we feel that, it was Graham Robinson, and he wrote this little article, and it says, the ABAP developer who joins a consulting company at the start of the SAP wave in the late 90s, he learned all there was to know about SAP development as it was at that point. And then and he was a contractor, so he lived the life as a consultant. And then once the boom died down, he got a permanent job at one of his former clients, and life was good. Hung out for 10 years. And then the developer realized that he knew nothing about any of the new technology SAP had come out with, because, it was always possible to get by using the same techniques that worked in the year 2000. However, things have changed, haven't they, Paul?
Just so you'd notice, and that was a blog called "A Call to Arms" by Graham Robinson many years ago, but it's true today as it was then. And I know. Sadly, I know several people like that, and
yeah, I do too.
And at this instant, you can get by. You can get by doing what you did in 1997, say. But this won't always be the case.
No, there's all this really cool new things happening. So so what I wanted to ask you is, one of the biggest questions I think everybody has out there is ABAP dead? Is it over?
Well, many people would say that because going back as far as the year 2000, a guy called Shai Agassi used to be in charge of development at SAP, and he said yes. He said it was going to be Java. Right, this is about 2000, 2001. It's ABAP. It's only done by people who live in Waldorf. The rest of the world is a Java world, so ABAP's completely dead. And a lot of people thought, oh, the writing's on the wall. This is it. It's all over. 20 years on, right? Somewhat different. And ABAP has jumped out of the grave, as it were. You have at the end of horror films where they stick their hand up out of the grave right at the end.
We're here, and we're back.
So much so that a few years back, SAP hired 300 odd graduates straight from university to work on the ABAP language. So it's an investment in the future. And if anything, it's evolving just as fast as the other languages, the modern cool languages, because a new version comes out every 3 months now. And that has been for the last couple of years.
That's interesting. I think that most ABAPers really need to look at all this new stuff that's happening. You wrote your book in 3 different sections of where where ABAP's going, which is the database, the business logic, the user interface. So, and then of course, automated testing underneath everything. And, so one of my things is so why even bother with object-oriented programming?
A lot of people will say this because, as we said earlier, you can still get by doing procedural programming, what's called form routines and what have you. It'll still work absolutely perfectly. And sadly, even in the very, very latest releases of ABAP, you can still do it, which is quite sad, really. But there was a reason SAP pushed people towards object-oriented programming back in as far as the year 2000, even if it hasn't taken on so well since then. And the reason is, it's because it makes you write what's called solid programs. Solid is an acronym of 4 or 5 different principles of the world. And once you learn about it, you'll realize that there's a reason for this. It's actually really good. When I started writing blogs, I wasn't convinced about OO programming at all. Many people who have met me at conferences have said, "You're the one who writes against it." I said, no, it's not that I was against it. It's just I didn't blindly accept it. That's a subtle difference. I'm not going to do anything until I'm convinced it's good. So I wrote a big series of blogs about the differences between OO programming and procedural programming, and I came to the eventual conclusion that yes, OO programming is better, but I didn't take it on faith. I had to do experiments. I had to use it in real life. It does take a lot of getting used to. Procedural programming, you can get it in a day. OO programming, more like a lifetime. So that second one's a bit difficult, isn't it? That's a bit.
We'll talk about lifetime. You and I were talking about, when people say, when they see ABAP on a piece of paper and people are like, what is ABAP? And then of course, if you're SAP, you're like, that's ABAP. And I asked you the other day, I said, so where in the world did the word ABAP come from? Or what does it mean? And we were talking about the whole German thing. I mean, so what did you find out?
Well, I
asked you to go and find this out.
I did indeed. I looked it up. ABAP initially was a German, 4 German words. It's an acronym of German words. And when you translate them to English, it comes out as General Report Preparation Processor. It really isn't very snappy. But
it sounds better in German.
I'm sure it does. Which is why to this day, if you write lots of what's called a executable program in ABAP, you have to start it with the word report, even if it is not a report. As that was the original purpose of ABAP,
Interesting.
report processor.
Huh, interesting. So let me ask you this. What when everybody's talking about S4HANA. So what does an ABAPer do when S4HANA comes in town?
I've had one of my friends in America told me that one of his friends didn't even bother applying for a job on a company that had just gone to S4HANA because he said, oh, well, I'm an ABAPer, right? So S4HANA has got nothing to do with for me, so I'm not even going to try.
Oh.
But in actual fact, it's not as different as you might think. There's two flavors of S4HANA. There's the on-premise, and if you do that, you probably won't even notice the difference.
Yeah.
To SEAT, which is the development environment, and it looks exactly the same. Columns are a little bit wider, but that's about the size of it. You wouldn't really notice. And has been said, even if you go to the cloud version, they now allow you to program in ABAP as well, right inside the cloud version. Nothing's, in essence, nothing's changed. It's there's no reason to hide under the sofa and hope it all goes away.
So is it what about like Fiori? I mean, we're hearing a lot of that.
Well, there's several things to say here. First of all, I just got to say that the difference between Fiori is a design pattern. It's how the screen looks. And the word means flower, because it's supposed to be stunningly beautiful, which is a bit of an exaggeration in my mind. It is nicer than the grey screens that we in SAP. Stunningly beautiful, perhaps is going a bit too far. But anyway.
It really means flower?
Yes, that's right. And it's Italian for flower, as I understand it.
I did not know that. That's pretty cool. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
That's the way. What scares people off is the fact that you need to know a little bit about JavaScript in order to really develop all the moving parts of a UI5 Fiori application, because the back end, the model, is in ABAP, it ends in XML, but the main body, the controller, is in JavaScript, and that scares people off because it's the myth that programmers can't learn new languages. Because amazingly, as I always say, there was a time I didn't, and I managed to learn that.
Well, you'd be like a full stack ABAP developer, right?
Exactly right. Because a lot of times, oh well, the poor old ABAP developer, they're not smart enough to code the front end, so we'll hire someone else.
That's right. They were all mainframe guys. Still hanging out on there. We need to teach this to the youngins. Let me. But there's so much new things. They're like ABAP Git. What is that?
Git it's been described as the most exciting thing that's happening in the SAP world that's not even developed by SAP.
What?
And what's happening again is, as the years go by, ABAP becomes more and more like other languages, like the so-called cool languages like Java and JavaScript. Git, what they use is something called Git for version control. People say, no, we don't need that in SAP. Our version control is wonderful. It's absolutely brilliant. It can't be beaten. However, again, if you just step outside your little comfort zone for a second and discover what Git is, you'll see that it's actually it's a completely different concept than SAP has ever been used to. But it's the path that SAP is going down. SAP have even now started to issuing new software using they put it on GitHub, you download it using ABAP Git. A good example would be the so-called clean code checks. Available by GitHub, and that's an SAP. That's an SAP product, basically.
And that's all open source, right?
It is indeed. That's a very new concept for SAP. It used to be all bespoke. Right? It's a SAP had a not invented here mentality.
That's right. Nobody except SAP you could use, nothing else, nothing else. I remember those days.
Exactly right. But they've embraced open source with open arms, if you forgive the pun. That's,
we were talking, wasn't the thing about, like, you know, the developers that say, I'm never going to use open source. And then they get up in the morning, they get, you know, they make breakfast and all, use their appliances, and then they get in their car and they drive to work, they use their keypads, open the door, get their computer up, and half of that was all used by open source.
Exactly right. Even a car.
Even the car.
Is full of, your car, you might not be aware, but your car is full of software.
Yeah.
Most software is open source. And on your mobile phone, on open source software, you're using it constantly. And then it's work, and they say, oh, with ABAP, we have no, we've got a no open source policy. The funny thing is, I've found that if something doesn't work, if you have, I don't know, some sort of open source software you've got and it doesn't work, right? First of all, you're supposed to fix it yourself. That's it, the whole idea. But let's just say you can't. Let's just say you've a hard basket. Right? I can't fix the whatever it is. I found if you go on LinkedIn or anywhere to the inventor, you'll get a response within a few minutes.
That's true.
Rather faster than OSS SAP support.
That's because you developers just like to hang out there. You're like, you're playing, working with your
Yes, so you notice. Well, again, any programmer, if you're told there's something wrong with your program, you'll want to fix it because that's why you're a developer in the first place.
You're obsessed with getting it to work. Now, I also noticed that your book was like reviewed by some of the guys that actually wrote some of this. Who was it? Lars?
Yes, Lars Peterson from Copenhagen. He's a mega genius. There's no doubts about that. He wrote a version of ABAP that runs outside of an SAP system. That was always considered impossible. You need a I don't know, a life support system for ABAP language, say, which is a SAP backend, and he managed to write one version that runs in the cloud, as it were, runs without.
Yeah, amazing.
And yes, it's very clever.
That's because he's German. I think.
Oh, no,
totally think it was.
You know, watch out with the Europeans. They're not all German.
I know. I was telling him, I was like, "Yeah, do you remember back in the day when all the notes were in German, so you couldn't figure it out? You had to call support."
So I lived in Germany for many years, and once I started getting my head around the German language, at least a lot of the code in standard SAP suddenly started to make sense.
It did. Well, I also found out that you wrote most of this book in the Horse and Jockey Pub in Homebush, Sydney. So we have to give them like snaps for letting you stay there. And they gave you a table and a plug. Yes,
I have got my own table in the corner. I can plug in the power. And even yesterday, the landlord gave me a slice of pizza for nothing. So here we go. And in the same way, the previous version was written in the Dubliner in Heidelberg. Oh, right? And if you ever go down the main street of Heidelberg and find the Dubliner pub, you'll see there's a glass case full of mainly American football things. It's called the Steelers.
American football.
I think the Steelers is some sort of club. Oh. And anyway, so it's mainly Steelers memorabilia, and in the middle is a copy of my book in this glass cabinet.
Is it really? Oh, that's so cute. That is really cute. But what one thing that so the thing that drew me to you was that you blog. and you blog, and you actually on the SAP community page. So if anybody ever goes out into the SAP community page, look for Paul. He blogs all the time. And, you can't like advertise your book on the community page. So you actually came up with this really very, very creative like story. It was a murder mystery of Dracula. And it was like an 8-part series. So tell us what you did. Like, so each series, what happened? I mean, what was?
So there's a series of 8 blogs, which I'd encourage someone to look at. And it's a music called I Can See ABAP Moon Rising, which is a pun on a song from the 60s. And in each one, first of all, I'll talk a bit about the process of writing a book. As Kendall said, you can't directly advertise the fact you've written a book, but you can talk about the mechanics of it. So first of all, I talk about mechanics. Then it's a bit of the plot. Then there's a song. It's ABAP based song each time. And at that point, there is a clues to the murder. Count Dracula gets murdered. And the idea is that the audience, i.e. you, have to find out who killed him. And I've got a room full of prizes that my wife has made in her sewing room. And no one's claimed it yet.
So nobody can figure this out.
I've got all the clues are there. It is what's.
Don't you have clues also in something else too? It's like a puzzle or a quiz.
There's 3 different sources. There's the blogs. There's the downloadable code using ABAP Git, by the way. All the code in the book can be downloaded to your local system, so you can see what the world I'm talking about. And also on the web page of the book, you can download a spreadsheet, which is a quiz. Right now, and that's free. The quiz it make a lot of sense without the book, but there's questions that can be answered, and every time you answer like 10 questions, you get some more clues.
And nobody. Okay, this is like everybody out there. You guys have got to solve this mystery and get his wife's presents. This is crazy. You guys all have to do this.
It's what's called a zebra puzzle, and it's only the top 1% of the population are smart enough to solve it. But look, that's the audience I'm targeting. That's the audience.
Okay, so I'm telling you, once we get the winner, we're gonna have to be like, you are the top 1%, and see if they. So that's the. I don't know if we have any 1%ers out there, but you'll all have to try to get this. I know it won't be me. I can read about. I think it's very intriguing, but you kept me entertained. That was the difference of most of these books that I read. You actually like start off and you're talking about code, you're da-da-da, and then the example is Frankenstein. And I'm like, what? Frankenstein? What? It's making monsters. So it just kind of made me like wake up and not like just trance reading. I was like, what is he talking about? What made you come up with all this?
Most of these examples are, as every ABAPer would know, the term S-flight, right? And maybe you've never heard that, Kendall, but it's an example that SAP always uses, and it's all about flights, because they think that everyone can relate to getting on a plane and flying somewhere. So all SAP examples are about S-flight, generally, and it bores you to tears after a while. And it's like sometimes when I go to these before the plague, when I used to go to these in-person SAP events, and there'd be a subject I was really, really interested in. A German guy would get up on stage and start talking technical, and I'd be asleep within 5 minutes, even with a subject I was really interested in. Especially these days where people's attention spans are short, you've got to engage them.
Right. Oh, I know.
And talking technical just doesn't cut the mustard, as we say. Okay, you've got to spice it up a bit, and that's the monsters.
The monsters.
Sure, Donald.
Well, they were. They was wearing his monster shirt.
There we go. That's I use monsters to spice things up.
I think that's great. It's very creative. I love that. all developers have got to be, have a little fun in what you're doing. So, anywho, we are going to open up the chat room to let people ask him some really hard questions. See if we can stump him. It has to be about SAP though, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yes. It's asking about sport. I've got no idea.
Just some random thing. I can see it now. I'm just going to ask you this random thing. And you'd be like, what are you talking about? All right. So let's see. Here we go. Okay. All right. So the first one is, what is the point of automated unit testing?
Okay. In many places I've seen, there's no automated unit testing in ABAP at all. One guy said, I can count the number of developers who do this on one finger. And he might not be talking about his company. He might be talking about the world. So it's not very popular. And in ABAP, though it is in other languages.
Right.
The reason being, it's the point of an automated unit test-driven development or automated unit tests is you write a load of test code to test the real code that you're writing. And that sounds like work. It sounds like a lot of effort.
Yeah.
And it is true. You end up writing like maybe 5 times the amount of code or more. But the point being is it's what I call an investment, because it's more effort up front, but the time you save later on in debugging and troubleshooting by far outweighs the initial investment. And one of the guys on the internet, he put it like, if you're forced to learn the piano as a child, you might not enjoy it at the time, but looking back, you'll never regret
it. So here's some funny questions that people are asking you. So how much time did you spend every day after work on the book, Up to the Future? And how did your wife allow you to spend that much time outside at the bar?
She wasn't happy. Let's put it that way. Right? And because there's 2 things. First of all, yes, I leave work, I go to the pub and I write for an hour or so. Right? Then I go home. And she didn't appreciate that. And then me to earn a fortune from it. And oh dear, that's not true either.
I know, writers don't get anything. So, oh my gosh, you're so funny. So let me ask you this, or here's another one. What about the future of function modules where most of the logic is written in the new CDS world?
Yeah, well, first of all, with function modules, they'll still be there, because if you're sticking with the SAP GUI, which many people do, that's the only way to have a screen is in a function module. But as has been said, there's no logic in it. But yeah, the idea is just function module is there just to display the screen, and the logic goes backwards and forwards to the module. And yes, there's more and more logic being pushed down to the database in a CDS view. This is the future. This is where it goes. You can, I just want to stress, you can unit test CDS views as well.
Right.
Just to be clear about this. In the same way you can unit test ABAP code. So there'll be a place for, as long as the SAP GUI is alive, and that'll be a long time. There's still a place for function modules, but they'll be a very empty. Let's put it that way.
So another question here is, how do you convince people to keep learning? He said, I'm assuming no one has no power to impose this choice. So how do you do it? How do you convince people to keep learning ABAP?
Well, it's often when I'm asked especially by university students, what is the secret sauce to programming?
Yeah.
Is how do you, I don't know, get above the crowd? How do you rise above the crowd?
Or how do you even learn? What's the learning path to get to the future of ABAP? Same thing. Yeah. How do you?
The good thing is, it's so much out there in SAP world. There's the SAP, the obvious one is the SAP community website. I look at it every day just to see if, and then look at the blogs, filter by ABAP development, see what's there. You'll probably learn something every single day. And there's these so-called open SAP courses. All right, they're free as well. And they can be, we're talking about hours, 20 billion hours of free courses out there on ABAP.
Should I give them your phone number too? They can go, they can call you. Have a chat. So let's see, here's another one. SAP always talks about VMs. Which company, where or when did VMs start?
VM, I presume they mean virtual machines.
Yes.
And I've got no idea whatsoever. Because I tend to, again, I work for a company, and it's all in house, and what have you, and so that you can build the whole thing being the ERP system, right on your PC, using virtual machines and what have you, without having to go through your company. What have you?
So what
do it?
I know. So here's one. What do you think about Fiori versus Neptune competition?
Again, I've heard of Neptune, and that they the most exciting thing they were doing was a offline SAP application where it would run on your phone or what have you, even if you're going through a tunnel and there was no connection to SAP. And that was very impressive, it has to be said. But it's not really a competition, right? Because, as I said before, Fiori is a design pattern. Or what have you? It's what's in the back end. You can do Fiori without using UI5, using Neptune or any sort of JavaScript at all. Right? And even someone the other day wrote a blog on the SCN about using a Fiori thing, using SE80, doing everything in ABAP. And it would still be Fiori compatible because Fiori it's not a technology, it's a design pattern. It's the way it looks and feels. So the back end doesn't matter. So
like, here's another one. What is the future of SAP UI5? UI5.
UI5.
And then what about other trendy frameworks such as Flutter?
Well, again, it's going back to exactly what I said. UI5 is just a library in JavaScript. SAP want you to use it, right? And they've even open sourced it amazingly. So hence you have your open UI5, but it's not. As I said, it's not the only option. You can use it. The thing about I found web programmers is they don't stick to the same language. 10 minutes. Right, there'll be a new version of JavaScript. It'll be Angular one day, React the next. It'll be something else. Which is why it's odd that ABAP are so they change languages like they change shirts.
Yeah, and all these weird names.
Exactly right.
I know. So should ABAP developers learn to code in Cloud Application Programming Module, CAPM?
CAP. It's actually, if you write it down, it's CAPM, right? But the M is silent.
Oh.
That stands
so
for...
it's CAP.
Yeah, exactly. Cloud Application Programming Model. And there's a gentleman out there called DJ Adams. And if you want to know anything about the CAPM, or CAP, as it's called, I would advocate Googling him, because he's absolutely brilliant on this model. And that's again, it's a way to program, and it's not very ABAP-y like, because there's no ABAP involved whatsoever. But it's again, it's a SAP endorsed way of programming. And
so they're also actually asking, can you use React for data intensive?
Yes, I've
UI5.
I've done a work when we first did our very first what I call UI5 application. I was doing the back end in ABAP, and again our web people were doing the front end, and they wouldn't touch UI5 with a 10-foot barge pole. Because they liked React, they liked Angular or whatever, and we're going to write it that way. And because SAP Gateway, it's open source, it's OData. Of course, anything can talk to it. That's the whole point. That's the whole point of OData, is to make it amenable to any whatever front end language is there.
So here's a good one. So someone said that I find that getting a beginner-friendly ABAP guide is getting tougher. How does Paul advise, and what's your advice to a beginner to start learning ABAP? All right, Paul, I think you need to write like ABAP for beginners. You would be hilarious. So you'd be like explaining the whole thing out. So what do you think? I mean, where can they start? I mean, if they were just right in college.
It's very difficult because, of course, if someone went to university, it's not as if they're going to ABAP's too like all boring and square to be taught there. Well, they teach them Java. They go, okay, yes, exactly right.
Go and learn Java. That's all the universities are teaching now. That's it.
Exactly right. So, so the amazing thing is, people suddenly they'll look at ABAP programs and think, this is nothing like Java. It's nothing like JavaScript. Oh, dearie me, this is difficult. But the funny thing is, that's because people don't write object-oriented ABAP. That's that. If they did, it would look a lot like Java. And it would look a lot, I mean, it's even load of JavaScript type things. Java and JavaScript are completely different, by the way. I just thought to throw that in. Completely
okay,
different.
So here's another one. Can we use React for data intensive? Did I just ask that one? I think.
Yes, yeah, we've done that one.
Do you see the role of ABAP in AI, machine learning, and chatbots?
Well, it's a big thing, AI, what have you, and really, I've seen very few examples of ABAP being used for this. I've seen it written mainly in other languages. But there's nothing to stop somebody.
That's right. That guy wrote ABAP outside of the SAP, didn't he?
Exactly right. Because
it can be done.
Anything you can write in another language, you can write in
Germany. In Germany.
It's as simple as that. The fact that no one has done it thus far doesn't mean it's impossible.
Okay, so SAP has been introducing other web technologies like React, Angular, and JS as part of their front end. So we know that there are lots of people who know React and Angular. Will the SAP UI5 jobs going to be replaced more by the people who know React and Angular?
Well, as I said earlier, once upon a time, I didn't know ABAP. I knew BASIC. That was when I was 14. And then at university, I learned Pascal. And then later, learned ABAP. And also, I've learned Visual Basic to program in Excel. So I can learn new languages.
Okay, so
here's the
best. Anybody can learn. So this one's good. Did Paul ever learn Groovy so that he can call himself a Groovy programmer?
I've made that joke in the book, strangely enough. These languages are so silly. And
silly.
In the book, I've made up some languages as well.
Oh, did you? You should the Monster Mash. You should
Well, I claimed in the book there's a language called Avengers Assembler.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. Oh my God.
Really.
That's funny. Okay, so here's one. How do you think ABAP can be one of the major development platform on cloud, BTP? Because there is a bunch of open language options available on BTP for side-by-side developments.
At one point, it appeared that ABAP was really going to be dead because
I thought so too. I thought it was just going to like.
Because the idea was in S4 HANA.
So Paul works at the cement company. He works at a cement company. So you literally could like cement it in, like totally get rid of it.
It looked.
I wonder how many people.
It looked that way for a while because what SAP, what they wanted people to do was they wanted to go to S4 HANA Cloud.
Yeah.
And all extensions would have to be written in any language you want except ABAP.
Really? I did not know that.
That was the plan, initial plan. You had to side extension, and it had to be written in Java or JavaScript or anything at all. All right. Then they came up with the idea of ABAP in the cloud, which is now the so-called BTP, which is Business Technology Platform. That's what that stands for. Right. And then that was a side-by-side. And then they came up with so-called embedded Steampunk, which is
yes. Oh, this. Tell us about your Steampunk.
Steampunk, first of all, the name, sounds really strange. It's a genre of novels where it's generally set in the past, but they've got the technology that we have today. But go back to Queen Victoria's time, say they've got spaceships, but they're powered by steam, right? And Steampunk, that's the SAP have called their ABAP. I'm going to still call it ABAP in the cloud because that's what it is. The internal name for this is Steampunk. Right? That's
pretty cool.
It is, especially if you think Germans, they're not usually much for levity.
I know. I was like, what is this steampunk thing that these German dudes are coming up with? I'm like, they're being creative. I'll give them that. So that was their internal like code name for it?
Yes, exactly right. And I was lucky enough to be in Waldorf for the party, right? And they had a jazz band and they called it Steampunk.
Those developers, those German developers, I tell you what, they're so clever.
But anyway, the point being, with the advent of that, suddenly ABAP was back. It was back on the table.
Yay.
Being like, oh, well, that's yesterday's language. That's the end of the world. In this cloud world, it's not going to happen. Now it's, first of all, it was don't do it. Then it was side by side. You can do it in ABAP if you want. And then with the so-called embedded Steampunk, even S4 HANA Cloud, you can
cool.
in ABAP. It's what they say. It's not your grandfather's ABAP.
It's all new. So so someone wrote, for the future of SAP, could we assume that closer to the standard, the better? Customization still a thing in some industry segments.
Well, I think, as a saying, I think it comes from the Bible, there's nothing new under the sun. Or some people say history repeats itself.
Yeah.
But started off in, again, 1997. That was there. Everything has to be vanilla. Everything has to be vanilla. Keep to a complete standard. And to be fair, everyone tried. Everyone tried to keep it as vanilla and standard as possible. And said, oh, well, we need this little thing here. Let's do a little bit of Z code here. Let's do a little bit of Z code here. Let's do a little user exit here. Before you know it, have your system's a Z thing. And this happened to everybody. And SAP are coming up with the exact same message today. Saying, no, keep the core clean. Don't do any of these stuff.
So is that the whole like low, no code thing?
That's a completely different, and also the low code stuff means low code, right? Because that's what it sounds like. Right?
It sounds like you never have to code again. The way they kind of the marketing.
What they generally mean, there's two strands to this.
Okay.
First of all, there's going back to the BTP and the Business Application Studio. And it's not about there being less code. It's about less code you have to manually write. Right? With the BTP, about pressing buttons, right? And it generates most of the code for you, which admittedly is in JavaScript and what have you. Then you can change it thereafter. But there's still a whole bunch of code. Right? It's not, and there is no-code solutions. There's something called AppGiver, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But
a big company was not going to want to do that. I mean,
well, not really, because with all these low-code solutions, you can go so far. In the end, people always want something more.
Yeah, yeah.
No one's ever happy. No one's ever satisfied. And they say, oh, you can generate this report in 15 seconds. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. All right? And then you give it to the end user and they say, this is wonderful. Can we have this extra column here? Can you make this feel editable? Can we do this? Can we do that? And well, my no code thing doesn't do that. It's time to call in development.
Yeah. So is that like the whole, like the custom ABAP development on the cloud versus the custom development on like the BTP? Is that the? There's no real difference. Really? To be honest, it's because when the so-called BTP started, SAP was saying, no, it's going to be all done for you. There's no need for development. Everything can be done for you. You know, get rid of all your 20 years of Z code. You don't need it anymore. And I said, actually, we do. We wrote that code for a purpose. So SAP have done a 180-degree pivot and said, all right, yes, you can. All right, they're forcing you to it's not a easy process. Yeah. Because let's say the versions of ABAP in the cloud and what have you it's very streamlined, shall we say, and it's object oriented. Which I know the 2000s.
So you should have been doing 20 years ago. Now you're more or less being forced to do.
Of course, of course. So it says here, let's see, what is the CDS? As per SAP, the new CDS entities don't have underlying SQL views. What's the reason to come up with the CDS entities?
I could be really cynical here, and
tell us, Paul. What's up?
The difference, the main difference, as far as I can see, between a CDS view and a CDS entity is a CDS view worked on any database. All right, if you had an Oracle database, you could use a CDS view in ABAP. If you had a Microsoft SQL database, you could use a CDS view. A CDS entity, however, works with HANA. All right, you have to have a HANA database. All right, so a CDS view was open, as it were, and a CDS entity is closed, as in, so because S4HANA only works with a HANA database, right,
yeah.
They don't need to be open, I suppose. So what you used to have was so-called open SQL inside ABAP, which is now called ABAP SQL because it only works with HANA. You got a CDS.
Isn't that funny? They changing these names all the time. It's ridiculous.
Oh yes, they do. SAP's, and they're not the only company guilty of this crime. Constantly renaming everything.
Means the same thing, but we're going to call it this now.
Exactly right.
I like steampunk. I'm going with that.
That's right. But do you know, I'm not allowed to use that term in my book.
That's awful. Really?
I mean, SAP
they trademarked it.
Again, SAP Press gets to use. There's nothing to do with SAP. They get to use the name. They get to use the logo. But in return, SAP lays down certain rules.
Yeah. Well.
Is what they have to. They have to call everything by its official name.
Oh, it's not official. Okay, that makes
sense. So internally,
SAP
call it Steampunk, and they do it on their own blogs. Officially, SAP Business Technology Platform ABAP Environment, which is not anywhere near as snappy.
That's not snappy. So here's a good question. What does clean code really mean to you? And when should you start cleaning up the code to achieve a clean core?
Good thing about clean code comes from the book of the same name by Robert Martin. It was written, I don't know when it was written, about in the 90s, some point. And it's very simple. It's code that people can understand. I know that sounds crazy, but often I look at some code that people have written and I think, what in the world is going on here? Because
they don't have notes.
Well, again, you say, okay, this, you get the problem ticket, such and such or it doesn't work as well, right? Can you just make a little tiny change here? And okay, that sounds easy. You go, you think, what in the world is going on? Right? And if you debug it, it's all over the place. Right?
Yeah.
Clean code is simple as that. It doesn't mean even object-oriented. It just means code that can be understood. Right? It's what they call the technical debt. A technical debt is when you write something that no one else can understand. So you're putting a debt down that someone else has to pay, the next programmer that comes along. And that next programmer is you.
I was going to say, this is job for life. That's called job for life code.
But the thing is, you're hurting yourself, because if you write something like this, you come back in 5 years' time, you think, what in the world is this? What was I on? What
was I thinking? Oh my gosh.
Again, the idea of clean code is just simply to write something that's understandable when the next person comes on that has to maintain it.
Talk real quick. Let's talk about Eclipse.
Okay.
Because that's new.
It's again.
Well, a name changer.
It's not. Okay, it's not new in its own way, because
renamed. Sorry.
It's Eclipse has been used by, like, again, Java programmers and what have you for some considerable time, and it's a open source thing. Again, you can use it to program in ABAP, and again, its technical name is ABAP Development Tools, but really it's ABAP.
You're kidding. That's it. Really? That's the same thing?
No. And you can install Eclipse, you can download it on your local machine, and then within 30 seconds, you can connect it to your development system, and you can use Eclipse to program in ABAP. And the question is, why? Why would you do such a thing, right? When SAP already has its own environment. And the main reason is it's got all these what I call shortcuts. They're technically called quick fixes and what have you. And
probably open source.
Yes, exactly right. And in SE80, if your development environment doesn't do what you want, well, you're out, aren't you? You could raise a ticket with SAP, or you could live with it. Those are your two choices. Right? With Eclipse, if it doesn't do what you want, you can add the new functionality yourself, and then hopefully share it with the world. And there's a guy called Lucas Pegiel who's been doing precisely that, and he's got again an open source thing you can download into Eclipse, which has got all these billions of productivity improving things you can do in ABAP, where you just press a keyword and press a button, and again it's like that low code, no code thing. Except,
no code. That sounds like a song, doesn't it? Low code, no code. Or a drink, mixed drink.
Except it's not. There's no code, because it just generates boilerplate code, which you would do manually, and instead of taking like a minute, takes a second. That's the size of it. It's not no code at all. It just helps you. It just speeds up your work. And especially in Eclipse, it helps with unit testing.
Testing, there we go.
There's some things in SE80, for example, you can't automatically create methods for local classes, but you can in Eclipse. I mean, that's obscure, but when it comes to unit testing, it's a huge help.
Yeah. I think, all this new stuff that's coming out is really exciting for the SAP community. And we kind of were stagnant for a while, and now things are happening. And, I think that, like bringing back the dead with you and your monsters. And I love the fact that you're being creative and trying to teach people, and get them reading. I mean, that's was the fun part about your book. It was entertaining. It was almost like a novel within a technical book, and all your blogging and so forth. So I want everybody to start watching and following Paul because he's really funny. And also SAP Press, we thank you. You're giving us a discount coupon. So if you want 15% off on Paul's book, just put in, what is it? Book Club 15, and you get 15% off on his book. And I think someone just wrote that you're very hilarious for being up so early in the morning since you're in Australia. What time is it there?
It's we're coming up to 9 o'clock. The sun's up.
Okay, we're good. Well, I was like, is it 5 a.m.? And also, I want everybody to make sure you follow me on LinkedIn. Again, I'm Kendall Tyler, and I'm with DXC now. So anybody on ECC, let's go S4. I mean, give me a call. I can help you get there. We can call Paul up and he can help you too. So, but thank you again, everybody. Thank you, SAP Press. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, DXC. And thank you, everybody who joined. And we'll do it again. And the next book is going to be on finance. So thank you, everybody. And y'all take care. And bye, Paul. Bye, everybody.
Bye, bye. Bye, everybody. Bye.
Oh, we got to say cheers. Cheers, cheers.
Cheers, cheers, cheers.
Cheers, cheers.
All right.
Bye.